So I guess we should start.
Yes, let's do it. My coffee's getting cold, so.
I was going to say, I hope everyone's got a tea or a coffee. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being on the call. Welcome to our first kind of podcast / webinar in a 3-part series, as I mentioned before, of very quick 20-minute chats around the subject of getting back to work or a normal environment in the current situation. So as I mentioned, we'll be looking at the aftermath of this current situation across all 3 podcasts. What does it mean for role changes within businesses, for teams that are newly forming? And then when will, recruitment be back on track? That's, the big question everybody wants to know. So to join me in these conversations, I've asked some key players in industries to give their opinions and thoughts so that we can really get an understanding of different perspectives of the situation out there. As I just mentioned, we'll have Andreas, part of employee branding and recruitment team at PwC, joining us in a couple of weeks. We'll then have Eric, previous head of recruitment projects and organisational change at Transport for London, next week. But today, I'm very happy to introduce you to the lovely Chantel from the Recruitment Events Company. I'll leave her to introduce herself in a second. But we're going to focus specifically today around the topic of redeployment and mobility of teams. So how to get people back out of furlough into what may be formations of different teams. So the majority of companies are freezing recruitment. Some people are unfortunately letting others go, but the everyday tasks that may have been conducted by these team members who have left or those who have yet to be recruited still exist. And so that's where companies may now need to consider this idea of mobility and using that armory of skills that their teams have to place them in another area of the business. Now, just to note and to be very much aware, what we talk about may not be suited to every single business, every single industry. Therefore, it may not apply to every listener. But the information is there. As I said, it will be quite interesting as a kind of market research activity. Just to quickly mention, you have the option of asking Chantel today some questions of your own toward the end. So please feel free to type any of these questions during the chat. You should find a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window. So feel free to type there and we'll try and get us through as many as time allows. So just quickly to introduce myself. My name is Becca, account executive at Assis First. I don't know how many of you actually have heard of us at Assis First before. If you haven't, we basically have developed a recruitment technology that can aid the process of talent acquisition, talent mobility, and talent management of businesses through assessing the soft skills of candidates or internal team members. So we assess the potential of people to see how they will perform and succeed in specific roles, changing environments. So it's pretty typical in today's very much, changing working world. So I'm sure for those of you in in-house recruitment, you will have heard of these guys, the Recruitment Events Company. If not then, they're probably their annual outdoor recruitment festival, I think is the only accurate word to describe it, right? RecFest. So big drum roll, please, for Chantel, Client Success Manager at the Recruitment Events Company.
So I'll keep it extremely brief. I've worked in the recruitment industry for 8 years. Last 2 of those, I was head of operations for a tech RPO. I've been lucky enough to sit on pretty much any side of recruitment, so agency, RPO, and then in-house. I now help UK and European-based clients understand the market a little better, understand how their brand is perceived, how they should position themselves to TA folk like yourselves. And that's always through content, events, and then I've got a wider ecosystem. So it's very much varied, but what it does mean is that I'm constantly talking to people who work in the industry. And as a business, we have something called the RL100, which are resourcing leaders. And I'm very fortunate that I can speak to them pretty much all day, every day, and really learn what's next. So yeah, it's a super interesting job. And essentially, I just get to listen in on loads of different conversations.
Just get the gossip.
Yeah.
So I guess the big question then, based upon what you've heard out there in the field, are you concerned for the HR recruitment TA industry right now?
Definitely not. I think if I have to be really honest, when when this all started, I was extremely worried. But as the weeks have gone by and people have adapted, and the conversations that I've been having with people, there's actually quite a lot of optimism out in the market for TA functions and HR functions. And what seems to be happening is the TA industry has always been evolving, and I think what this period has done is actually just sped that process up. So I think people are excited, and I think people who have always wanted to be more than just acquisition, and now having the opportunity and the platform to speak about these different parts of talent, and they're being listened to. So actually, I think it's quite exciting.
Good. Oh, it's good that it's positive. And what do you think will happen in the next few months for those industries? Will, let's say, people continue to freeze hiring? Will their strategy change? What do you think ultimately is next?
So I think from a market perspective, I think short term, we're yet to see the impact of the furlough scheme. So I do think there will be redundancies. I'm probably not alone in thinking this. So I think short term, it could be painful, budget freezes, redundancies. And what people in TA will have to do is look internally and go, right, we need these skill gaps filled. We're going to have to use our existing workforce to move these people around and kind of cover those gaps. I then think longer term, we'll probably see like an open talent economy. So because we're now looking at how we work, talent will almost become boundless. So once companies have exhausted that internal employee mobility piece, what they'll then have to look externally. And when they do look externally, they won't be constrained by location, because we've all shown that, predominantly in most industries, we can work from home, we can work from a cafe, we can work in a different country, in a different city. So I think there will be almost like an open talent economy. And hopefully what that should bring is also a boom in diversity as well. So I think with the redundancies, we will see a dip in diversity, with women and people from the BAME community. If you look at statistically, a lot of these people have been put on furlough. But hopefully, once this open talent economy arises and talent is essentially boundless, we should hopefully then see a boom and a spike in diversity, which would be an amazing silver lining from all of this, to be taken away.
Yeah, certainly. Just going back to your comment on the multi-skilled, or the emphasis now on that. So meaning that where once maybe more specialism was required in roles, we may be seeing the introduction of, or importance of, a sort of more broad approach, kind of jack of all trades, dare I say it. I know that's quite kind of, off the cuff, but is that what you're kind of seeing then, or envisaging?
Yes, definitely. So I think so. And I think it's very interesting, because I think we've come full circle to that jack of all trade. And interestingly, I think that's exactly what businesses need now. I think how we assess that is going to be really important, and also how we enroll people into these kind of new responsibilities as well. You don't want to lose top talent, because essentially you're giving them more and more and more, and they're not engaged or challenged by the work that they're doing. So I think you need to assess essentially in-house what skills you have, what skills you need, and can you marry people up to them. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting piece, this whole like cross-functional project. I think it definitely needs to be on like a voluntary basis. So people need to be coming to you and saying that I want to help in this part, or I want to help in this function. And then I think, you need to be able to understand, do they have the right skill set? Because will is fantastic, but skill is also needed as well. So yeah, it's going to be a really interesting time for people who have specialised and now maybe need to pivot slightly. And then hopefully those people who are jack of all trades, who have invested time in learning different bits and pieces, can actually now step up and really, really make an impact.
I was going to say, it's a good opportunity for them.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I think this could be a good opportunity for a lot of people who have perhaps felt pigeonholed and want to express, a wider skill, a wider impact or passion. This could be a really good time to show the business what they've almost been missing out on. make you even more invaluable for the future.
I guess gloves are off. And what about for TA industry in particular? What do you think is next? What does that look like in the future?
This is exciting. So I've been a bit geeky about this. So
love it.
We call it the TA industry, talent acquisition industry. And largely what it's been is, how many people can I get in within certain metrics? Of course, it's more complicated than that, but from a very broad point of view, what I think we're now going to see is, I think we're going to see the function almost evolve and pivot into what's being called and labelled as a team function, which stands for talent, engagement, and mobility. So it's looking at the whole piece of people instead of just who are we bringing in to either replace or grow. And the reason why I'm so excited by this is because it's more strategic. It's more in line with business partnering. There's more of a voice, but critically, when there's an upturn in market, they'll be able to focus on mobility, sourcing, and acquisition. So they're of great value to a business. But when there's a downturn in market, like we're seeing now, they'll be able to focus on mobility again, transition, so that internal piece, and exiting. And what this means for the function as a whole and the industry as a whole is that we will become more and more valuable to a business. And the more value that we show, the more heard we will become and the more impact we can have. And then you have like a positive feedback loop. So I think it's super exciting. But if you're in the TA industry, you need to take this opportunity to pivot, to become more analytical, to become more advisory, look at skills management, look at structure design. And, you need to now become more than just attracting people to your business, which I think is super exciting, as you can tell, like on way.
No, that's great. But how about if there's some TA, talent acquisition team members out there who maybe feel that they're not getting that chance from their company, maybe because it is all well and good somebody really saying, right, okay, I'm going to step up my game. I really want to become more analytical. I really want to become multi-skilled. But then you have your employer turning around and saying, well, actually, no, there's no budget, or, we've got no time, or any other excuse.
Sure. I would say in any other time in market, you would get back 100%. But I think right now, businesses need this information in order to, a lot of businesses, in order to survive. So I think right now they are actually, from what I've seen and heard, C-suite are going to the TA function and saying, right, this is the data we need, this is the information we need, and then actually we need some guidance on how we're going to move out from this. So I think right now is a really good time to have those conversations. I would say after this time, and on recovery, if you're still kind of just purely focused on acquisition, I would say it needs to be a conversation at the top with C-suite. There's so many ways you can upskill. There's the LinkedIn training, there are events, there's however many webinars going on. So definitely get that knowledge first, then have that conversation. For me personally, every time I've wanted to do something within a company, I just went and did it. So it meant I worked longer hours, but then when they actually saw the value of what I was doing, it then kind of incorporated into my role, and then my roles pivoted. So I think right now, to answer your question, I think there should be very little barrier, because people, C-suite need this information right now. Founders, small businesses, they need this information.
Brilliant. Well, that sounds positive.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, that's good. And in terms of this kind of adaptation in teams, people moving about, it's obviously important to look at how people work alongside each other, because we don't work alone, right? So it's important to see, I guess, exactly how productive these two new team members will be together. What's the likelihood that maybe they get on, but actually in the workplace, they just, don't actually produce any work. What's your take on that?
I think it is a really good point. And I was speaking to somebody the other day who essentially they're looking at implementing kind of cross-functional projects to help with the skills gap of the workforce that they've lost. and they have sales and engineers teams now working together for the first time. And unless you've assessed profile by profile beforehand, you're kind of guessing if it's going to work or not. So yeah, I would say.
I was just going to say, we couldn't hear you for a second.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say that you need to almost look at, I mean, and you'll be far better to guide on this, but I would say you actually need to look at profile by profile. So who's going to be the kind of newly working together, and then assess each member of that cross-functional project or cross team. And so look at those profiles, and do they work well together? If they don't, you need to kind of go back to the drawing board, and yeah, make sure that they align personally and professionally, in order to have this mobility. I mean, it'd be good to get your thoughts on that, because I think this is, a real strong area of yours.
Yeah, certainly. Well, you've obviously conducted the affinity scoring. Chantal and I actually took, well, I've obviously taken our assessments already at Asses First, but Chantal took ours at Asses First, and we were actually, as part of the algorithms within the tool, we were able to assess how well Chantal and I get on. Not only just in general, because we both know that we love to chat, and we're possibly not the most efficient two individuals to work with each other, but the tool was actually able to identify if our aspirations were in line, if our motivations were in line, if our personality fits, and behind that, the tool was able to establish, okay, so what's the workload that we can actually get out of us two working together. So it's certainly interesting.
Yeah, and I loved, do you know what, you've just brought flashbacks of when we did that, and I remember, because I completed a profile just randomly, and then about 2 weeks later, you were like, oh, by the way, this is our score. And I didn't have to do anything else. I didn't even know you were doing it. It was kind of all behind the scenes. Yeah, I loved it. And I don't think we could probably share in a public forum like the score that we had. It was nice. Again, super interesting, because as you say, people who get on, are they necessarily going to be really productive together? So
exactly that. And also, when it comes to a working environment, aspiration and motivation is really important. If you don't have the same vision when it comes to professional everyday life, even if you get on, you may not actually be as productive as you want to be.
So I guess, as from a TA point, then it's not enough to say, Bob from finance really gets on with Sarah from back office, so actually Bob could upskill her and we can, mobilize her. I guess that wouldn't be enough. You need to go a few steps deeper.
Exactly that. And actually, I've just thought of a very weird example here, genuinely just off the top of my head. It's like when you have, and I don't know if any of the listeners can actually relate to this, but at school, when you'd have your best friend and you'd be giggling and giggling and giggling all the time in school, you obviously really got on well, but then halfway through the class, you were the two to be separated, because clearly there was not going to be any work being done there. And so it's a kind of similar concept.
Yeah. Flashbacks. It's like back at school.
Good. So just finally, put you under a bit of pressure. How would you go about redeploying people in a company today?
Just a small question. Just a small question to finish off. As you alluded to earlier in the webinar, there isn't going to be a one size fits all. This is going to differ per region, company size, industry. Some industries will recover quicker than others. So I think I went away, spoke to several people, tried to speak to people who work from really large corporations to small businesses, different industries, different locations. And I think there are some common threads that we could probably discuss now. But in terms of having a blueprint, I think it's too soon to see. I think once we've had the impact of the furloughs come about, and then moving forward, then people start to look at redeployment. I hope that we'll see some case studies come up, and make a great follow-up conversation for people who are then still going through that. But I think in terms of redeployment, this needs to come from the top. So if you're sitting in TA right now, you need to be sitting with your founders, your CEOs, whoever those key decision makers are, and you really need to ask them and yourselves, what is the organization trying to do? because your long-term plans may have considerably changed now. So what do they look like? What are you trying to achieve now? Is it survival? Is it thrive? From there, you need to look at, you almost need to build like a skills matrix. So what skills do you have in-house already and available? What skills have been lost? What skills are needed? These are two different things. I think a lot of companies will now be realizing that actually they had things, they had people that they didn't necessarily need. So what's been lost, but what's needed now? Some of these may come back in the future, right? So from there, what's needed now, and what capability do you have to upskill people? So, you know, it may be that people can be redeployed straight away. It may be that you need to, you know, to invest in these people and retrain these people. And if they have the will, hopefully, then they'll have the capability to upskill as well. So I think a skills matrix is a great place to start. And then looking at almost like a team matrix. So looking at mobility within the company before you reach out to those people who have been put on furlough. And then when these people are coming back, create. One example I did like from somebody was that they did a digital roadshow. It was 2 weeks. So the first week was webinars on all the problems that they currently have. And everybody who was still working and who was furloughed logged on and watched these webinars. Then week 2, these people could book themselves into workshops on finding solutions to particular problems that they spoke about week 1. So they were almost volunteering themselves and upskilling themselves and coming up with a solution before they kind of even returned full time. So I think that's a really nice kind of example there. And along with those workshops, they, on the side piece, they were building a internal knowledge bank so that they could retain as much skill and knowledge as possible, and then people coming on board can have access to that as well. So that was really interesting. And then I think the third kind of common thread was around like leadership. So with leadership itself, there is concern that top talent may go. You know, they've had to take pay cuts. They've had to take on roles and responsibilities that necessarily is not what they've signed up to, you know. And also I think they can be worried about their career as well. You know, a lot of their work isn't being seen right now. So there is a focus on retaining those leaders, but also if these people do go, which is very possible, you're going to need to look at bringing in new leaders, and you need to see what skills they need, because it's different now. These leaders now need to manage complex virtual ecosystems in real time, and that's easier said than done. So actually I think when you're looking at redeployment and you're looking to bring, you know, future leaders, potential leaders back in, you know, before you go out to market, you need to assess internally what new skills do leaders have, and do they have these? Yeah, it's super interesting. I appreciate that is quite broad and it's not a roadmap, but I hope it gives people a kind of a conversation starter to have with, you know, with their C-suite and with their founders, and can kind of start making inroads.
No, certainly. Brilliant. Chantal, thank you very, very much for your wisdom and insider knowledge. I guess to sum up, there's a pretty positive narrative I get from that, in terms of regards to possibly longer term effects of COVID. It sounds like strategies, priorities will obviously have to change within business. Guessing that there will inevitably be a much greater focus upon this need to be multi-skilled, you know, where maybe the highly specific candidates, which were once preferred, and it may be the case that actually requirement to be a lot more adaptive, able to take on different functions, is a lot more attractive to recruitment teams. But in any case, I guess you know, it won't be easy. And I think certainly, as you mentioned before, that for those in TA roles themselves who may see themselves having to take on that role of talent mobility manager, or, you know, onboarding expert, they need to make sure that they're kind of really finding the initiative to do that, to stay as relevant as possible. So listeners, if you wish, you have a very, very quick moment. I feel like we've spoken for a long time, to ask questions that you may well have to Chantel. I'm just going to have a look now. So first up, have you heard of any cases whereby team members are not happy to move on, to move post, department, or, vary or change their job roles? Chantel?
So I've seen some hesitancy, and I think with that it's all down to the approach. So I think when people, I've seen this in smaller businesses especially, it's kind of, okay, Bob, Sarah, Jeff, Becca, you're now doing this. There's no conversation. There's no why. I think, and this is spoon feeding, I appreciate, but there always needs to be a why and what the impact's going to be. I think that really helps enroll people. But the more successful cases that I've spoken to so far, the common thread there is that it's all volunteer based. So it's not that senior leadership are going to employees and saying, you must do this now. It's having a very different conversation, and it's almost sowing the seeds and saying, like, where do you want to progress? Where do you want to pivot? These are our problems. What ones do you think you can solve? And by having that volunteer basis, I think they're more passionate, there's more motivation. So yeah, I think, yeah, that's kind of forgotten the question there, but hopefully that's answered it. But yeah, I think the hesitancy comes with the messaging prior to the actual action of taking on more responsibility.
Brilliant. And very, very quickly, I'd be very interested in your thoughts on how to help employees transition back into the workplace after working at home for so long. Okay,
so we're now, Karen, do we mean physically going back into an office or a store? I guess we'll go with that. We'll go with that assumption. It's a really good question. It's not one I've had too many conversations around, because a lot of industries are keeping their employees at home still. What I have seen in terms of reboarding is what they're calling it. Very soft, almost looking at like part-time hours. So I think that a couple of case studies I've seen is that the first 2 to 3 weeks, they're actually going into 15 to 20 hours. And they also following a whole onboarding plan as if they were a new employee, because what they're finding is that people have forgotten certain skills. So they are treating everybody at the same place and making sure walking everybody up to the same point. But a lot of industries so far have kept their employees at home. And in that case, there's still a new onboarding plan going ahead. And yeah, I guess it's looking at light work and then refreshing skills.
Brilliant. Guys, I'm really, really sorry. That's all we have time for. I know Nathan and David, you've got some more questions. We haven't forgotten about you. We will email you across those answers. So thank you very much all for your time. Hopefully you found that insightful. Thank you, Chantel, for coming on. As I mentioned, next week, we'll be speaking with Eric, as I mentioned, previous head of recruitment projects and organizational change at TFL. And we'll be specifically talking about change in the workplace. So have a great weekend. And I'll see you all next Thursday again.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Take
Becca.
care.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.